The war had lasted for decades. It was not a war of honor or principle. It was conquest, pure and absolute. The Dominion, a vast empire of warlords and conquerors, had marched across the stars, swallowing entire civilizations into its iron grip. Species that resisted were annihilated. Those that surrendered were broken and remade as slaves. Against them stood the Alliance, a coalition of worlds bound not by ideology, but by desperation. They had no choice but to unite, for alone, none of them could stand against the Dominion's war machine. But even together, they were losing. One system after another had fallen. Fleets had been shattered. Armies had been wiped out. The Dominion was inevitable. And now, the final battle loomed. The war had reached a critical system, one that would decide the fate of the Alliance. If this world fell, the Dominion would have an open path to the Alliance's core worlds. There would be no stopping them after that. The Alliance had deployed everything they had left: ragged fleets, battered warships, desperate soldiers, but they knew it would not be enough. The Dominion knew it too. The Dominion fleet was the largest ever assembled, hundreds of capital, ships, each a floating fortress of death. Their weapons could rip apart moons, their shields could withstand the bombardment of entire fleets. They were not here for battle. They were here for slaughter. The warlords of the Dominion expected resistance. They expected a last pathetic stand. They expected the Alliance to send everything they had in a desperate bid to hold the line. What they did not expect was this: a single ship. At first, it barely registered on their sensors. A lone human warship, gliding into the system, its hull dark against the void. It did not hail them. It did not broadcast any warnings. It simply arrived. The Dominion officers scoffed. "A single ship," one of them sneered. "Is this a joke?" Even the Alliance forces, watching from a distance, were confused. Humanity was an enigma. They had joined the war late, offering only minor support, deploying small expeditionary forces that had never truly revealed the full extent of their capabilities. The Alliance had hoped, prayed, that humanity had been holding back, that when the time came, Earth would send a fleet to turn the tide. But there was no fleet, no armada, no reinforcements, only one ship. The Dominion commander overseeing the battle grinned. He had seen desperation before, but this was pathetic. "Destroy it," he ordered lazily. The first volley of plasma fire surged toward the human vessel, bolts of searing energy, each capable of melting through warship armor like a blade through flesh. There was no way to evade such an attack. There was no cover in the void. No shields could withstand a direct hit from such firepower. The human ship should have been obliterated, but it wasn't. It moved, not like any ship had ever moved before. One moment, it was there. The next, it wasn't. It was not a jump, not a teleport. It did not distort space. It simply shifted, so fast, so precisely, that the Dominion's tracking systems failed to register it. Gasps filled the Dominion's command deck. Where did it? Then, the ship reappeared, directly behind one of the Dominion's battleships. A single beam of light lanced forward. It was not a missile, not a plasma bolt. It was something else entirely. Silent, instant, perfect. The Dominion battleship's shields collapsed in a fraction of a second. Its hull, reinforced to withstand the most brutal assaults, crumpled as if it were made of paper. Then it detonated, erupting in a silent explosion that tore through its entire structure, leaving nothing but debris. The Dominion officers froze. One ship had just deleted a battleship from existence. A moment later, it vanished again. Panic rippled through the Dominion fleet. Captains barked orders. Scanners swept the void. Weapons locked on empty space. And then, another explosion, another ship gone. There had been no warning, no buildup, no chance to react. The human ship was moving too fast, striking with a precision that no Dominion fleet had ever encountered. It was an apex predator among prey. The Dominion commander's smug confidence shattered. This is not possible," he muttered, his voice shaking. Across the battlefield, the Alliance forces watched in stunned silence. For years, they had fought the Dominion and lost every battle. For years, they had been forced into retreat. But now, for the first time, something had changed. For the first time, the Dominion was hesitating. For the first time, the Predators were afraid, and the lone human warship had only just begun. The Dominion fleet had always known war. It was an empire forged in blood and conquest, where strength was the only law, and mercy was seen as weakness. From the moment their kind first reached the stars, they had expanded through destruction. They had slaughtered the weak, enslaved the useful, and crushed the defiant. No enemy had ever truly frightened them. Until now. The human ship was a ghost in the void. One moment it was there, drifting silently, as if it had no concern for the battle around it. The next, it was gone. The Dominion's most advanced tracking systems struggled to keep up, their sensors scrambling to reacquire their target. It moved in ways that no vessel should have been able to, turning at impossible angles, accelerating in bursts that should have torn its hull apart. The warlord in command of the Dominion fleet clenched his jaw, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. "This is not possible," he growled. His fleet had spent decades annihilating species that dared resist the Dominion's rule. They had seen every kind of warship, fought against every kind of technology. But this was unlike anything they had ever encountered. "It must be some trick," one of his officers said. "An experimental cloaking system, an advanced drive." "Tricks do not erase battleships from existence," the warlord snapped. They had already lost 3 ships, 3 capital-class warships, each the size of a city, each carrying thousands of crew members, each armed with enough firepower to level continents, and they had not even seen the enemy fire. The Dominion fleet adjusted its formation. The warlord barked orders. "All vessels, switch to full combat readiness, shields to maximum. Every ship, fire in a full spread. If we cannot target it, we will blanket the void and fire until there is no space left to run." Hundreds of warships shifted, their weapons aligning toward empty space. Plasma cannons, ion batteries, and railguns lit up the darkness as a storm of destruction erupted from their fleet. Entire sectors of space burned as the Dominion unleashed everything they had, filling the battlefield with enough firepower to incinerate a planet. For a moment, it seemed as if nothing could survive. Then the human ship reappeared. It did not emerge from hyperspace. It did not decloak. It simply was. It hung there, untouched, as if it had never moved at all. And then it struck. The Dominion flagship, a war beast forged in the heart of their empire, was the next to fall. The ship was a Titan, its armor thick enough to withstand direct bombardment for days. Its shields could endure the combined assault of an entire fleet. No enemy had ever dared challenge it head-on. The human vessel did not need to. A single pulse of light erupted from its hull. The flagship's shields shimmered for a fraction of a second. Then, they collapsed, flickering out of existence as if they had never been there at all. The next instant, the ship's reinforced armor buckled inward, crumpling like a fragile shell under an invisible force. Explosions rippled along its length, consuming decks in fire and debris. In less than 3 heartbeats, the Dominion's pride and glory was nothing more than a drifting wreck. The warlord barely had time to process what had happened before the human ship vanished again. The Dominion fleet fell into chaos. Officers screamed orders, weapons fired blindly. Ships maneuvered erratically as fear gripped the once invincible war machine. "Where is it?" one captain roared. "We can't see it." Another explosion. Another ship gone. Panic set in. Some Dominion ships, despite their war-hardened discipline, hesitated. Some even began moving away from the battle, trying to escape the reach of an enemy they could not see, could not understand. For the first time in Dominion history, they were not fighting an opposing fleet. They were being hunted. Across the battlefield, the Alliance forces watched in stunned disbelief. They had known humanity was different. They had seen glimpses of Earth's potential, but even they had not expected this. A single ship was bringing the Dominion's greatest armada to its knees, and it was not even trying. The Dominion fleet had spent centuries perfecting the art of conquest. Their war doctrines were refined through the destruction of entire civilizations. Their battle formations honed against the desperate last stands of countless species. But in all their long history, they had never faced anything like this. The human ship was no mere war machine. It was a predator. It did not fight like the Dominion expected. It did not engage in direct confrontation. did not trade blows like a conventional battleship. It moved through the battlefield like a phantom, striking from nowhere and vanishing before its enemies could react. The warlord's command deck was filled with the crackling of urgent transmissions. Officers shouted reports, but none of them made sense. Target is gone, disappeared from all scanners. Flagship, lost. We have lost the flagship. Another detonation. Port side. Where did that come from? The warlord's claws dug into the armrests of his command chair, his mind racing. He had seen wars lost before. He had personally led planetary sieges, where the tide turned in favor of the enemy. But this was not war. This was slaughter. Patch me through to all captains, he ordered, his voice dangerously low. The command deck fell silent as his message echoed across the fleet. This is no longer a battle. We are being hunted. Whatever defenses we relied upon before, forget them. Shields are useless. Targeting systems are blind. Do not fight this ship like an enemy. Treat it as a natural disaster. Adapt, or be destroyed. The warlord was no fool. He had not risen to command through arrogance. He understood survival. And at this moment, survival meant thinking differently. Decentralize the fleet, he barked. Break formation into independent units. Reduce the size of our attack groups. Make it harder for it to strike multiple targets at once. If we cannot see it, we predict it. Track the pattern of its movements. Lay down suppression fire in its last known positions and force it into open space. A desperate strategy. But desperation was all they had left. Dominion ships spread out, forming rapid response strike teams. They fired in coordinated sweeps, covering vast regions of space, attempting to cage in an enemy they couldn't see. They deployed sensor drones by the thousands, hoping to catch even the faintest trace of their foe. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then the human ship answered. A Dominion destroyer, part of the newly formed suppression grid, exploded without warning. Not from a visible impact. Not from an energy signature. Just obliterated. 1 second it was there, the next, gone. A second ship followed. Then a third. The warlord's eyes darkened. The human vessel wasn't merely avoiding their attacks. It was adapting faster than they were. Then, something even more terrifying happened. The human ship spoke. A transmission cut through all Dominion channels, overriding encryption, bypassing every security protocol. It wasn't a demand for surrender. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple, calm message, spoken in perfect Dominion dialect. You expected an army. 1 ship is enough. Silence. For the first time in Dominion history, their fleet had no response. Some captains froze, unable to process what they had just heard. Others panicked, breaking rank, ordering full retreat. A few, the most stubborn, gritted their teeth and held position, only for their ships to disappear one by one. On the outer edges of the battlefield, the Alliance forces watched in stunned silence. Some cheered, others whispered in disbelief. The Dominion had always been the unstoppable force of the galaxy, the invincible armada that had crushed every foe beneath its heel. And yet here they were, powerless. The human ship did not slow, it did not gloat. It simply continued its hunt, and the Dominion finally understood. This was not a war, this was a reckoning. The battlefield had become a graveyard. Wreckage drifted like dead stars, the shattered remains of warships that had once ruled the void. The Dominion fleet, an armada that had crushed civilizations without effort, was now barely holding itself together. And yet the human ship was untouched. The warlord stood at the center of his command deck, eyes fixed on the tactical display. His fleet was crumbling before his very eyes, not through overwhelming force, not through superior numbers, but through something far worse. Hopelessness. They had thrown everything they had at the human vessel. It was not just fast. It was beyond their understanding of physics. No Dominion ship moved like that. No war machine could turn at impossible angles, accelerate to blinding speeds, then stop instantly. But this one did. It struck without warning, without pattern, without any logic they could comprehend. It was always a step ahead, always outside their grasp. It was like fighting against a nightmare, something that defied reason itself. And now, for the first time in Dominion history, their fleet was retreating. Not because of overwhelming numbers, not because of strategic failure, but because they were afraid. Across the fleet, captains were breaking rank. The most disciplined warships, the ones that had fought in countless campaigns, were pulling back, prioritizing survival over orders. Some had already activated their jump drives, fleeing the battlefield entirely. The warlord's hands clenched into fists. Cowards! He slammed a fist against the command console. His rage boiled inside him, threatening to consume his reason. This was impossible. This was unacceptable. But then, deep in his mind, a whisper of something far worse took root. What if we were wrong? What if the Dominion was not the apex predator of the galaxy? What if humanity was something far beyond them? The warlord turned to his tactical officers. Prepare a priority transmission to High Command. I want every detail of this battle transmitted. Immediately, we need reinforcements, we need… An alert flared across the display. A ship had just vanished. Another followed, and another. The human vessel was no longer simply destroying the Dominion fleet, it was accelerating its assault. The warlord barely had time to react before his ship lurched. The entire command deck shook violently. Lights flickered. A deep, resonating hum filled the air, one that sent chills down the spines of every Dominion officer. The ship's shields, designed to withstand the combined firepower of an entire fleet, collapsed in an instant. And then, in the heart of the Dominion flagship, the lights went out. For the first time in his career, the warlord felt something unfamiliar, a creeping sensation that gripped his chest, that made his breath shallow. It was fear. "Status report," he barked. Silence. His officers scrambled at their consoles, but nothing responded. The Dominion flagship, the strongest ship in the fleet, had just been rendered helpless. And then, the voice returned. That same, cold, human voice that had echoed across their comms before. "You expected an army. One ship is enough." The warlord's blood ran cold. This was no mere technology. This was no simple enemy. This was a weapon of judgment, and the reckoning had begun. The warlord had witnessed countless battles in his lifetime. He had led planetary sieges, watched civilizations burn, and crushed rebellions under the weight of the Dominion's war machine. He had always believed in the power of his fleet, the unbreakable armada that had ruled the void unchallenged for centuries. Yet now, as his flagship drifted in silence, powerless against a single human warship, he realized something terrifying. The Dominion was not the strongest force in the galaxy. They had only ever fought the weak. And now, they had finally provoked a species that was beyond their understanding. The command deck remained eerily silent. Officers scrambled at their stations, their claws frantically tapping on unresponsive consoles. The Dominion flagship, once the heart of their invasion force, was nothing more than a floating corpse, its systems dead, its shields down, its weapons useless. The warlord's mind raced. What kind of weapon could do this? No energy signatures had been detected. No projectiles had hit their hull. No cyber attacks had breached their defenses. Yet here they were, paralyzed, blind, and waiting for death. A deep hum resonated through the hull, vibrating through the floors and walls. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a weapon strike. It was something else, something more terrifying. The ship was being scanned, not a simple data scan. This was something invasive, something alive. It felt as though the human ship was reaching into their systems, peeling them apart layer by layer, learning every detail of their technology, their tactics, their history. A shiver ran down the warlord's spine. They're not just hunting us, they're studying us. Then, the lights returned, but only in a single place. The center of the command deck. A holographic projection materialized. A ghostly figure, humanoid in shape, clad in sleek, unfamiliar armor. It stood tall, motionless, its form flickering, with distorted static. The warlord's claws tightened around the hilt of his ceremonial blade. The figure spoke. "You came here expecting a slaughter." The voice was calm, cold, unmoved by war. "You thought yourselves invincible." The warlord bared his teeth, his fury battling against his growing dread. "We are the Dominion. We have conquered worlds beyond counting. You have conquered the weak." The warlord froze. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if considering something. "You are not warriors." The Dominion officers bristled at the insult, their hands hovering over their sidearms. "You are butchers, parasites. You prey on those who cannot fight back. You mistake fear for power. But today," the figure stepped forward, "you learn what true power is." The warlord lunged. His blade passed through the projection, hitting nothing but air. The figure did not flinch. Instead, something else happened. The hum returned, deeper this time, vibrating through the warlord's bones. A chilling realization dawned on him. It wasn't just their ship being scanned. It was them. The Dominion officers staggered back as the sensation intensified. Their heads ached, their bodies trembled. It was as if something unseen was looking through them, breaking them down, piece by piece. The warlord gritted his teeth. What are you doing to us?" The human figure did not answer. Instead, across the entire Dominion fleet, ships began to die. One by one, the war machines of the Dominion shut down, powerless, defenseless, drifting like wrecks in the abyss. The captains inside screamed for control, but there was nothing they could do. The human ship had disabled an entire fleet without firing a single shot. The warlord fell to his knees. He had always believed that war was about strength, that those who had the biggest fleets, the strongest armies, the most ruthless strategies would always win. But today, he understood. This was not war. This was judgment. And the Dominion had been found wanting. The warlord knelt in silence, his breath ragged, his body trembling as the weight of realization crushed down on him. All around him, his officers were paralyzed, not by force, not by injury, but by something far worse, by understanding. The Dominion had ruled through fear, had shattered civilizations, had ground entire species into dust beneath the iron boot of conquest. And they had believed, truly believed, that this was the natural order of the galaxy, that they were its apex predators, its rightful rulers. But they had been blind. They had only preyed upon the weak. Now, for the first time, they had encountered something beyond their comprehension, something stronger, something that saw them not as conquerors, but as vermin to be purged. The holographic figure remained still, its cold, unwavering gaze locked onto the warlord. There was no gloating, no arrogance, no cruelty, only the detached efficiency of something inevitable. "Your empire is dead." The words echoed through the command deck like a funeral bell. The warlord gritted his teeth, his claws digging into the cold floor beneath him. "No, we still have ships. We still have warriors. The figure raised a single hand, and across the entire fleet, ships began to vanish. Not explode, not break apart. Vanish. One moment, they were there, hulking, war machines bristling with weapons, shields, and armor. The next, they were gone, erased from existence as if they had never been. The officers on the command deck watched in horror as the viewscreen displayed the massacre. Ship after ship winked out of sight, their captains unable to scream before. They were consumed by the unknown. One of the officers collapsed to the floor, his eyes wide, his mouth trembling. What is this?" The warlord forced himself to his feet, his breath heavy, his body stiff with tension. He had never known fear until now. "This is not destruction," the figure said, as if answering the unspoken question. "This is erasure." The warlord clenched his fists. "What does that mean? What are you doing? What kind of weapon is this?" The holographic figure stepped forward, and for the first time, its head tilted slightly, as if considering him. A lesson. The hum returned, low and resonant, pulsing through the hull, through the walls, through them. The warlord felt it in his bones, a deep and insidious vibration, as if something ancient had awakened within the very fabric of reality. He turned to his officers. They were fading, not dying, not bleeding, fading. Their bodies shimmered, outlines distorting, fragments of their very existence peeling away as if they had never been. The warlord's eyes widened in horror. No! No, this isn't possible. He reached for the officer nearest. To him, his second-in-command, a warrior who had fought by his side for decades. But the moment his claws touched the officer's shoulder, nothing. His hand passed through empty air. The officer was gone. The command deck was silent. The warlord turned back to the figure. His voice was shaking now, though he tried to mask it. This is beyond war. This is something else. You aren't just killing us. You're... The figure simply watched him. The Dominion will be erased. Not defeated. Not conquered. Erased. The warlord's legs nearly buckled. This was not war. This was a purging. The galaxy had suffered beneath the Dominion's rule for generations. Countless worlds had burned, countless species had been exterminated. And now, the same fate had come, for them. Only the human ship was not simply destroying them. It was ensuring that the Dominion had never existed at all. Memories, records, histories, all of it was vanishing. Their databases were blank, their archives were gone. Even their homeworld, the E. Warlord's breath caught in his throat. He turned toward the holographic display, hands shaking as he entered the override codes for the Dominion's central homeworld. A planetary-scale communications network that had been operational for thousands of years. A signal that could never be severed, no matter how many fleets were lost. But the screen flickered. A cold, blank void stared back at him. The warlord gasped. No! No! That's impossible! The homeworld should be... It was gone. Not burning. Not invaded. Not conquered. Gone. Erased. The Dominion's homeworld had never existed. The warlord staggered backward. His mind refused to accept it. His hands trembled. His heart pounded against his ribs, desperate for this to be some kind of trick, some kind of deception. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The Dominion was not simply dying. It was being unwritten. The holographic figure turned, as if to leave. But before it did, it spoke one final time. This is justice. Then, darkness. The warlord let out a choked breath as the last remnants of his ship collapsed into nothingness. And with it, the Dominion was gone. The warlord gasped as the void swallowed. Everything around him, his ship, his officers, his fleet, vanished into nothingness. There was no wreckage, no debris, no lingering echoes of destruction, just absence, as if the Dominion had never existed. He could still feel himself, his body, his mind, his very existence, standing in a space that should no longer be. But the command deck was gone. There was no floor beneath his feet, no air to breathe, no walls to contain him. Yet he remained, floating, alone. He turned his head sharply, scanning the vast, infinite darkness. It was not the cold abyss of space, not the silent vacuum between stars. It was something deeper, something final. His heart pounded as he realized what had happened. He had not been spared. He had been preserved. A single remnant of a dead empire held here. But why? A faint hum vibrated through the void. It was different now. No longer the overwhelming reality-bending force that had erased his people. This hum was waiting, expecting, and then it spoke. You remain. The warlord spun around, but there was no figure, no source of the voice. It was everywhere. And yet, it carried the same measured, inescapable presence as before. You have seen the judgment of your empire. You have witnessed the cost of its existence. And now, you will understand. A light bloomed in the void. At first, it was small, distant, no larger than a star on the edge of a dying horizon. But then it expanded, unraveling before him like a tidal wave of memory, and the warlord saw. For the first time, he saw. Not the victories, not the conquests. The truth. Entire. Worlds turned to dust under Dominion rule. Civilizations forced to submit. Their histories erased. Their cultures suffocated beneath the iron doctrine of control. Refugees fleeing across the stars, only to be hunted down and exterminated. Entire species, millennia of progress, innovation, dreams, and existence, wiped from reality as if they had never been. He saw their faces, the ones who had begged for mercy, the ones who had fought to the last, the ones who had no strength left to resist, the ones who had vanished, just like the Dominion had now. He fell to his knees. His breath came in shallow, rapid bursts. His hands clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms until the pain grounded him. "Why are you showing me this?" he whispered. For the first time, the voice did not respond immediately. Then, it spoke. "Because you were their executioner." The warlord shuddered. "You stood upon the ruins of broken worlds. You watched as species fell beneath your banner. You justified it. You called it strength. You called it order." The visions shifted. This time, not to the past, but to something else. Something worse. He saw the paths the Dominion would have taken had it not been erased. He saw empires yet to rise, only to be crushed before they could take flight. He saw worlds that should have flourished, planets that held wonders yet undiscovered, reduced to barren, empty husks beneath the relentless expansion of Dominion fleets. A future where the Dominion had lasted forever. A future where the galaxy itself had been choked to death. The warlord's breath hitched. For the first time, he understood the sheer scale of what had been done here. The human ship had not merely destroyed the Dominion, it had rescued the galaxy from it. And yet, "You let me live." The words left his lips before he had even fully processed them. His voice was hoarse, uncertain. The hum returned, slow and deliberate. "Yes." The warlord clenched his jaw, his hands trembling. "To what end? To make me suffer? To leave me as the last remnant of an empire that no longer exists? No." A pause. Then, "To decide." The warlord blinked. "The Dominion has been unwritten, but the echoes of its sins remain within you. That knowledge, that burden, is now yours to bear. The future is no longer set. You alone will choose its path." A faint glimmer of light appeared. Beneath him, not the void. Something real. A world. A chance. The warlord swallowed hard. His mind rebelled against the very idea. He had spent his entire existence believing in one truth: the strength of the Dominion, the right to rule, the certainty of conquest. Now there was nothing left of it. No empire, no doctrine, just him, and a choice. His claws loosened. His shoulders sagged. For the first time in his life he felt small. Not weak, not powerless. Just a being, one among many. He let out a slow, trembling breath. And then, he stepped forward. The light engulfed him. The void vanished. And the last remnant of the Dominion descended toward a future unwritten,